We are going to study Parshas Lech Lecha. Uh, can be found in the Stone Chuma, starting on page 54. Although we're not going to start at the beginning. So Parshas Lech Lecha, of course, deals with the career of Avraham Avinu, or Avram, as he was when we first meet him. We also meet Sarai, and we learn of some of their adventures and misadventures. And I want to begin our discussion tonight with the account of the battle, or I should say, the aftermath of the battle between the four kings and the five kings, of which the Lot, the nephew of Avram, is captured and is abducted, effectively held as a prisoner of war or a hostage, as you like, and Avraham joins the fray. He defeats the four kings. He returns the people, the captives, and the booty to the king of Sodom. And on page 64, it says in Pasuk Chaf Aleph, so it's chapter 14, verse 21. In the art scroll, it's page 64 in the Stone Chumash. Vaymer Sodom el Avram, tein li hanefesh v'harechush kach lach. Give me the property, or rather, I'm sorry, give me the people, and the property you take for yourself. In other words, to the victor go the spoils. Avram has saved the day. He has redeemed all of the hostages. He has restored the prisoners to freedom. And the king of Sodom thanks him and says that it's only right that as the victor you can keep the booty. Vayom Avram el melech Sodom harimosi yadi el Hashem kel elyon. I raise up my hand to the Most High God, konei shamayim va'aretz, who has acquired heaven and earth. Imichud v'ad sroch na'al. If I take anything from a thread to a shoelace, if I take anything that belongs to you, Avram. Now, actually, this episode we're going to look at more closely on Shabbos at Kesher, when we're going to consider the prophet's prophet, Avraham, and the spoils of war. But for tonight, I want to look at a different aspect of it, or rather, a different aspect that we're going to do on Shabbos. And I want to put this in the context that Abarbanel sort of addresses it within that wider perspective. And here, what I want to share with you is a portion of a longer essay by Abarbanel, in which he enumerates 10 examples, 10 features of the personality or career of Avraham Avinu that reflect his greatness, and in particular, what's called nefesh ha-sichlis, the thinking or the cognizant or the cognitive soul. That is to say, Avraham had a soul like every human being has a soul, but some people develop their soul intellectually and spiritually much more so than others do. And so Abarbanel says that we find in the career of Avraham, who is the subject of much more elaboration, much more nuance, much more detailed than any other figure in the Torah up to this point. So we learn about Avraham, about Adam and Chava. We learn about the sons of Adam and Chava, Cain and Hevel. We learn about a number of other personalities and events. Of course, we learn about the flood of Noach, and we learn about Noach a bit along the way as well. But Avraham is the first personality whose achievements, whose life, whose trials, famously as the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos mentions, 10 trials of Avraham, are described in detail and emerge with a nuance, with a multi-dimensional complexity, which goes far beyond those who came before him. Says Abarbanel that Avraham represents the fully refined, the fully accomplished, the fully sophisticated spiritually and intellectually individual. He goes so far as to suggest that Adam Noach and Avraham, the main three personalities who we learn about, the three men. We don't learn that much about the women along the way. I guess Chava, perhaps we do. Noach's wife, Nama, other than her name, the Torah doesn't tell us much about her. But okay, that's just as an aside. He's also not interested that much in the women, Abarbanel. He's talking about Adam, Noach, and Avraham. And he says that are they correspond to three of the important categories we find in early sources, and I don't think it's unique to Jewish sources, that the world as we know it can be divided into four different categories. There is domain, which is that which does not grow, that which is inert, that which is uh, like the mineral world, which is rock and soil, water. That's domain. We have tzomeach, that which grows, that which is alive, but it only grows like a vegetable or a tree. That's tzomeach. We have chai, that which has life in it. We're talking about ba'alei chaim, about animals or creatures, birds, fish, insects. Those all are they move about, so they have chayim. And then we have the highest level is midaber. Midaber is the reference by which we encapsulate the, perhaps to say the essence is going too far, but like we exemplify the human being by his quality of speech, his ability to speak. And that probably derives from or is consistent with the famous reference in the Targum Onkelos in Parshas Bereshis that when Adam was formed from earth, God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, Vayi Adam lenefesh chaya, and man became a living soul. The Targum Onkelos says l'ruach memalala, that man became a speaking creature, like a spirit that has the ability to speak. The human capacity for speech exemplifies our capacity for achievement, for thinking. If you can't speak, then it's hard to think, because even when you think in language. And if you don't have language, it's hard to even formulate thoughts. This actually is a subject of a lot of scientific and philosophical study. It's not for now, but I think we can all agree, if we think about it a little bit, that midaber, the capacity of speech, typifies and exemplifies the human condition. And therefore, in those four categories, I'll repeat them again for those who may not be familiar: domain, tzomeach, chai, midaber. Domain is like mineral, that which is inert; tzomeach, that which grows; chai, that which lives; and midaber is a person. So says Abarbanel that Adam, obviously, all of these people are well above the domain, because domain is inert, has no life within it. So Adam is connected someach. Doesn't mean that he was only like a tree that grows, of course, but relatively speaking, relative terms, Adam came from the earth. So just as a blade of grass grows from the earth, just as herbs or vegetables or plants or bushes or trees grow from the earth, so Adam came from the earth as well. But compared to those who came after him, this is Abarbanel's characterization, Adam is like Someach only. Noach was much better. 10 generations later, Noach was tzaddik. He was tamim haya b'dorosav. He's described as a righteous person. So Noach went beyond Adam. Maybe the other members of the generation perhaps did not get far above the level of Adam. Maybe they descended lower, in fact. But Noach was a righteous person, of course, as we know. So Noach is like the Chai. And of course, Noach is one who saved the Baalei Chaim. He saved all of the animal world. So he is associated with the animal kingdom, which is a big step beyond Adam, who's likened to Tzomeach. Again, I'm not saying that they were not fully human. Of course they were. But in relative terms, with regard to achieving and maximizing and actualizing the potential innate within the human condition, Adam didn't get that far. Noach got further. Avraham is keneged midaber. Now he doesn't say, Abarbanel doesn't elaborate, but I think midaber, we find that Avraham is a midaber. He is one who speaks. It says, of course, we find that the others spoke as well, but it says, Vayikra b'shem Hashem, that Avram built an altar and he called in the name of God, which means that he summoned others. He used his power of speech to pray to Hashem and to encourage others to pray to God. Of course, Avraham was the first Kiruv outreach personality, much more successful at that than Noach. Of course, he's compared to Noach and was compared to Avram, and Avraham emerges as the more activist, more, let's say, ambitious personality vis-a-vis his relations with others. Of course, that is accomplished through the power of speech. Also, we find that Avram speaks to God quite a lot in the course of his career. So Avram is like the Midaber. So with that introduction, Abarbanel then goes on to enumerate 10 instances of that, 10 examples of where we see that his intellectual capacity was dominant and his spiritual appreciation, his refinement, completely like controlled and completely like transcended and uh, always demonstrated like control over his physical like needs or physical desires, and these correspond broadly to the 10 trials, but they're not exactly the same as the 10 trials. Actually, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos does not enumerate, the 10 trials. It's only in the later sources that we find different opinions as to exactly what were the 10 trials. Rashi has one idea, Rambam has another idea about the 10 trials. But in any case, these are not identical to the 10, but of course there is some overlap. And the one I want to focus on is the one that I've already begun with in my introduction, that when the king of Sodom said to Abraham, to the victor go the spoils. You're entitled to all of the wealth and all of the property. And Avraham declines. I want to read you just a few words of Abarbanel. The Hebrew is not difficult. I want to read in the Hebrew for those who have facility with Hebrew. I'm just looking at some of the participants here. We've got some scholars here as well, a scholarette from Katamon as well. So I want to read you the Hebrew. We'll translate it, of course. Mibnei bazoso hakinyanim. So Avram raises his hands and he takes an oath to God. So I'm not going to take anything of this booty, of this property. I'm not going to. I'm going to return it all to you. So says Abarbanel, mibnei bazoso hakinyanim v'hamomenus, because he disdained material acquisitions and monetary profit. Kichein derech hanefesh hamaskeles. This is the manner of the sophisticated, the spiritually refined soul. Shetifazeh hamamonus v'akinyanim. He disdains, or he shuns, he avoids. He's not preoccupied with, even just the opposite. He's doesn't crave mamonus, monetary acquisitions and properties, hamadumim, which are like illusory. V'tarim yadeha, he's referring here in the feminine to the soul. The soul, metaphorically, lifts up its hand in an oath, El Hashem hidabek bo, to cleave to God. So you have this beautiful kind of anthropomorphic image in which Avraham said, Harimosi yadi, I raised my hand, which probably was just meant as a excuse me, as a metaphor, as a expression of an oath. But in Abarbanel's usage, he says it's like the soul that reaches out and seeks to cleave to God, to grasp onto God, so to speak. Excuse me. So this is what Abarbanel said. This is one of the 10 that he mentions. I don't want to go through all of them, but that's one of the 10 which he mentions. It gives rise to the question, why is it that, and Gur Aryeh asks this question, why is it that we find that Avraham does take gifts from Paro? Previously, before this event, when Avram and Sarai were forced by the famine to go to Egypt, so Sarai was abducted and taken to the harem of Pharaoh, and as a result of the evident relationship between Sarai and Avram, of course, according to the story, according to what they told people, they were brother and sister. So Abraham was enriched as a result, and the Torah describes how he camels and donkeys and lots of wealth as a result. We find that Avram did take that. So that is a question that we will answer when you come to the Shir on Shabbos. Okay, for those who have access to it. But I just want to add something else here. Actually, two other things. Firstly, we see here a an echo of the life of Don Yitzchak Abravanel himself. He, remember, was a very wealthy person, extremely wealthy, extremely successful, extremely well positioned. He was the leading courtier of Ferdinand and Isabella, and even before that in Portugal. Again, he was a very wealthy, well-connected, successful, prosperous personality, and the family had been actually for generations before him as well. He came from wealth and prestige, and yet he left it all behind. He left it behind when he fled from Portugal to Spain. He left it all behind the second time when he fled from Spain and he went into exile with the rest of the exiles in 1492. So I'm sorry, I keep saying Ibn Ezra. Abarbanel knew about wealth and probably had, I would say, inevitably some understanding, some appreciation for wealth. He was also very generous. We mentioned in our little biographical sketch the other day that he single-handedly, or he let's say was the primary donor in redeeming a whole city of Jews in Morocco who were set upon by bandits and essentially held hostage, and he redeemed them with his money, a vast amount. So he was extremely philanthropic, and he had osher v'chavod, and yet Abarbanel himself, like um, gave tangible demonstration to his own values, in which he left behind his wealth and his prestige in order to go into exile together with the other Jews in the Alhambra Edict in 1492. So I think, although he doesn't reflect, at least in the condensed text that I have been working with, he doesn't reflect on his own experiences. But to me, there is an echo of it in what he attributes to Avraham, the like prioritization of spiritual matters and the denigration of material wealth. I want to add another thought as well. Again, Abarbanel doesn't say this. But the Gemara in Chulin says that there is a significance to the fact that he said, "Imichut va'ad srochnal." If I take a thread or a shoelace, says the Gemara in Chulin, because Avraham expressed his declining of the offer of the king of Sodom for the booty. In terms of a thread and a shoelace, a shoe strap, really, srochnal is really not a shoelace, it's really a shoe strap. Because in those days, they didn't have laces in their shoes, they had straps, they had sandals. Excuse me, says the Gemara that in the merit of what Avraham said, his descendants were granted a reward of two precious mitzvot: the mitzvah of tzitzis, which is chut, and the mitzvah of tefillin, which is sroch, which is a leather strap. So the reference to this strap and before that the thread is associated with those two mitzvahs. So uh, it occurred to me that what is special about those two mitzvahs, I think those are mitzvahs which involve the thread, of course, is the mitzvah of talis, meaning the thread is a mitzvah associated with a garment that a person wears. So a person wears a garment, and the Torah says on the corners of your garment you should attach fringes, you should attach threads with certain properties. That symbolizes to me the uh, elevation, the like endow in the infusion of spirituality into the physical. A garment is physical. A garment is something that a person needs because he has a body. A soul doesn't need a garment. The body is the garment for the soul. The garment for a body is just a garment. It's just something material. It's made of material. And therefore the arba canfos, the tzitzis that we place on the four corners of the garment, symbolize ennobling and uplifting and infusing spirituality into the physical. That's what Avram did. That's what the whole essay of Abarbanel is, the 10 examples, the 10 ways in which we see Avram has the nefesh hamaskeles, the soul which is spiritual, the soul which is thinking, which is uh, uh, which like dominates the physical. So therefore, the bracha, or rather the reward that his descendants received, was the talis, which is that which ennobles and uplifts the physical and the material. The tefillin is a bit similar. It's a strap made of leather, comes from an animal, but that again is uplifted, is exalted. It is a means by which we take something very physical and we infuse it, we use it as a mechanism, as a means by which we can get close to Hashem. The act of wrapping tefillin around the arm, of attaching it to one's upper arm, and the tefillin shel rosh that are attached, that are ukshartem laos al yadecha, to tie it as a sign upon your hands, that represents the means by which we cleave to Hashem. So therefore, although Abarbanel doesn't say this, but I would suggest, based on the Gemara in Chulin, that is the deeper meaning of those two examples. He could have said, if I take a chariot, or if I take a lamb, or if I take a camel, or if I take a sword, or something like that. But he mentioned those two in particular, and the Gemara associates it with those two mitzvahs that the descendants of Avraham Avinu were gifted, so to speak, among the Taryag mitzvahs, because they are means by which we can also achieve some echo of that spiritual yearning that Abraham demonstrated. Excuse me. I want to talk, I'm clearing my throat. I'm just going to have a drink. Excuse me. For those who paid attention, we mentioned that the title of our discussion this evening is Unfinished Business. I want to talk about the unfinished business. So the Torah describes a little bit later in our Parsha the great covenant between the parts. This is the time when Hashem promises Avraham the land of Canaan, but he also tells him that there's a long journey before that promise is fulfilled, is realized. And even though Hashem repeats the promise to Yitzchak and repeats the promise to Yaakov, but it was only realized, the promise of the land of Canaan was only realized hundreds of years later. In fact, about 400 years later, as the Torah itself says, in this covenant between the parts. So if you're with me in the Stone Chumash, it continues on that same page, the very last word on page 64, the first word in chapter 15. Achar Hadvarim Ha'il, after these words, after these events, Hashem came to Avram, in a vision, and he told him about the future, and he told him he's going to be a great nation, and he's going to father multiple nations, in fact. And it says in Pasuk Vav, Vehemin b'Hashem echshaveh lo tzedakah. He believed in God and he counted it as charity. It's not clear if it means that Hashem, so to speak, gave Avraham credit for his faith, or maybe it means that Avraham counted the blessing or the promise of God as charity. In other words, Avraham didn't feel that he was completely worthy or deserving of it. He regarded it as a charitable act from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Rishonim had different possible interpretations. But I want to share with you what Abarbanel says about the details of this covenant. Look at Pasuk Tes, verse 9. Vayomer elav kcha li egla mushuleshes, ve'ez mushuleshes, va'ayil mushulash. 3 heifers, 3 goats, 3 rams, v'tor v'gozal, a turtle dove and a young dove. And he was told to, presume to slaughter them and to cut them into pieces, into 2 parts. And it's difficult to know how much to take at face value, how much is purely metaphor, that the Spirit of God passed between the parts. And just read you the next, maybe we'll read in English for simplicity's sake. He took all these to him. He cut them in the center, placed each piece opposite its counterpart. The birds, however, he did not cut up. Birds of prey descended upon the carcasses, and Avram drove them away. And it happened as the sun was about to set, a deep sleep fell upon Avram. Behold, a dread, great darkness fell upon him. And here is the prophecy: your descendants will be persecuted and enslaved in a foreign land. They will depart. They will leave with rechush gadol. But what I want to share with you is what Abarbanel says about the symbolism of those animals, and the symbolism of cutting them in two, and the symbolism of the birds, the adult bird and the gozal, which is a young dove, a turtle dove, and a young dove. Says Abarbanel that and also this expression mushulash. So the Art people render it, take me 3 heifers, 3 goats, but it's not so clear because egla is in the singular, aiz, goat is in the singular, ayal is in the singular. What's mishulash? Three, should say agalot mishulashet, izim mishulashim, or something like that. So we find the word mishulashes often is used for the best. And there's certain basis for, I think Rashi mentioned that as well. But just taking a look to see if it's in Rashi. Maybe it's elsewhere, that it's used as a metaphor for the best. So the best quality sort of choice from your flock and from your herd. Abarbanel says that's not the meaning. The meaning is that there are 3 of them. It says Egla Mishuleshes, Eis Mishuleshes, Al Mishulash. It means like one of the 3. One of the 3 is this, one of the 3 is that, one of the 3 is the other one. Why are there 3? Why the emphasis on the 3? Because there are Shalosh Avos. Says Abarbanel, these 3 correspond to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The Eglah refers to Avraham because it says later on in next week's Parasha, Vel habakar ratz Avraham, that Avraham ran to the herd in order to choose an animal to slaughter for the benefit of his guests. But it says ala bakaratz aram, so the eglah, the calf or the heifer, is associated with Avraham. It says the ayal, the ram, is associated with Yitzchak, of course, because the ram was offered as a korban in place of Yitzchak. So Yitzchak is the ayil. The aiz, the goat, is Yaakov, because when Yaakov was instructed by his mother to impersonate Esav, so she told him to go to the flock to take 2 gedeizim, and she prepared it for Yitzchak as the food that he had requested, and the skin of the goats Yaakov put on his own forearm in order to impersonate Esav. So we find that the egla, the aiz, and the ayil are associated with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Why were they cut into 2? Cut into 2 implies unfinished business. Something whole is whole. It suggests that the mission completed, the project has been sort of brought to fruition. But what cut in half implies it's been cut short. The promise to Avraham was never realized in the days of Avraham, nor in the days of Yitzchak, nor in the days of Yaakov. Each of them died long before the prophecy was fulfilled. In fact, in their lifetimes, the prophecy was very far from being fulfilled. I mean, when Avraham's wife died in 2 weeks Parsha, he had to negotiate at length and pay a king's ransom to buy a burial plot to bury his wife. Hashem promised him the whole land, and in the end, he had to negotiate extensively and overpay for the value of one cave. So he was far from realizing the days of Avram, the days of Yitzchak as well, the days of Yaakov as well. I mean, Yaakov ended his life in Egypt in exile. What about the promise? The answer is, got to hold tight. It would be fulfilled, but not in the days of Avraham, Yitzchak, or Yaakov. In whose days would it fulfilled? The days of Moshe and Yehoshua. So he says, Abarbanel says, that the birds are the symbols of Moshe and Yehoshua. He says, that the Torah Gozal, because the Moshe began to conquer the land, even though he didn't actually cross into the land of Israel itself, but the lands of Sichon and Og he did conquer. And as we know, the tribes of Reuven and Gad did settle there. It became like an annex of Eretz Yisrael. So although, as we very well know, Moshe died and was buried in Chutz La'aretz, but nevertheless, it's sort of the project Moshe began the end. He began the sort of last stage of the process of conquering the land. And the Gozal, of course, would be Yehoshua, his successor. So the turtle dove is the adult, and the Gozal is the next generation. So it's Moshe compared to Yehoshua. Says Abarbanel, an interesting interpretation. We assume, the Torah doesn't say it outright, we assume that Avram slaughtered these animals and the birds as well. And for some reason, the birds he did not divide. Maybe a bird is so much smaller than a goat and the others that there's not much to divide. But in any case, the Torah says it clearly. V'satzipar lo basar, the bird or the birds. I mean, it should be two birds really. Tzipar lo basar says, and then it says vayerid ha'ayid ala pagarim ve'ashav osam Avram, that the vulture maybe or birds of prey descended on the carcasses and Avram drove them away, which is interpreted in the Medrash in various ways. Says Abarbanel, that's not what it means. Vayashev osam Avram means that Avraham chased away. He released the birds. The animals were slaughtered and divided into two, but the birds were released because the birds would live on. That is to say, that the birds, Moshe and Yoshua, would be the ones to finally bring about the realization of the promise. So, because it was they who would experience the end of the 400 years of exile, the redemption from Mitzrayim. Okay, the wandering in the wilderness wasn't maybe part of the original plan, but Moshe and Yoshua both experienced that as well. And Moshe began to conquer the land as well through the lands of Sichon and Og, where some of the tribes settled. And of course, it was Yoshua who actually brought them into the land. So according to Abarbanel, it's not that Avram was driving away the birds of prey. No, he was driving away, and he was releasing al panei hasadeh to fly freely. The birds representing Moshe and Yoshua. I found this to be a very novel, very creative, very original interpretation I've not seen before. And to be honest, the whole Bris Ben Abasarim is somewhat opaque. It's rich in metaphor. Of course, it's deliberately sort of concealing the deeper meaning, and much has been written about it in a Kabbalistic way as well. Of course, Ramban speaks about it, the Medrash speaks about it, the remez to the four exiles and the ultimate redemption. It's all in this short passage. But Abarbanel has his own angle on it, his own creative approach to this. And just say a few words. He concludes, Achatorva Gozal, Hifricham Chayim. He caused them to, he chased them away, meaning he released them, Chaim al Panei Hasadeh, and in this way, the prophecy of Abraham incorporates within it the promise and the confidence that Avram had that it would be eventually fulfilled, but also the fact that it would not happen immediately, even in the lifetimes of Abraham, Yitzchak, or Yaakov. So this is unfinished business, but of course it was part of the divine plan, and ultimately the promise was realized. The land of Israel, or Canaan, was granted to the descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and we are fortunate to live in an era in which the Jewish people have once again returned to their land, and hopefully it will serve as the prelude to the ultimate fulfillment of the promise that Hashem gave to Avraham, and we look forward to that, Bimher Av Yameinu. So thank you for listening, and those are some thoughts from Abarbanel, creative ideas which I found worthy of sharing with my good friends on this Zoom shir. So thank you very much, and Laila Tov L'Kulam. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
Fantastic.